This strut here, the springs were really light gauge and they kept breaking. They were really weak and just kept breaking, so I got this spring out of a Mazda, and all I did is I took a piece of pipe with me and I went and checked a few vehicles around, and I found a spring because that fitted inside the original one perfectly. So I found a spring that fitted in nicely. Then I brought it back home. So I had two springs to the front, brought it back home, cut it to the length I wanted, and then the piece that I cut off, that's the spring there, and that there is a piece that I've cut off that I've actually welded. You can see in there that I've welded to that ring. So the ring's welded in there and the spring is welded in place as well. So then this spring here is now sitting on this piece that I've welded round, and that is acting as the base for it. And that way when you cut it off, you know how they can bring it round and it ends up level. So that is a homemade way of getting round that problem. You can just use part of your spring as your spring seat and a piece of pipe inside as your captive to keep it in place. And that's been going like that for about 3 years and I haven't had a problem with it. So right now I'm going to do some spacers that I made for this quite a few years ago, and when I changed the springs it was too high, but now it's sitting too low now that I've taken the spacers out. So I'm going to go and dig the spacers back out of the container and cut them down to about a 25mm, maybe a 30mm rise, and that should hopefully stop some of the damage in the front. So here's some spacers I made a few years ago, and all I did is I went around the engineers, found a piece of pipe the right size that I wanted. I cut out 2 bits of 5mm plate and drilled the holes and hole sawed out the holes. I've got a big hole saw, and that just bolts to that through the holes, and that plate just bolts directly up to the body itself. Like I said, with the standard springs on, that was a good size, it gave us plenty of lift, but when I put these heavier springs on, it needs to come down a bit, so it hasn't been running them, and now the front's destroyed. So that's around about an 80mm lift I put on it, so I'll drop it down to about, I don't know, maybe a 40mm will be enough, maybe 45. So what I'll do is I'll cut it off at 40. No, I'll cut it off at about 35, I think, because I don't want a big lift on it. I just want to get it up off the ground a bit. So if I cut it off at 35 plus that 6mm plate, that'll be over 40. So that'll do. I'll do that. So all I'm going to do that is I'll find something to sit here, sit my screwdriver, my marker pen on it, and then just turn that round with the marker pen holding it there, and that'll give me a line right round. Then I'll cut that off with the angle grinder, probably do it that way around and cut that piece off, because that there is likely to warp if I muck around with it too much. So I'll cut it off, cut the plate off, clean it all up and weld it back on. Right, so that's what I've cut out. That's the base plate. There's the other plate cleaned up, ready to go. Both of them are done. 2 bits that I've cut out of there. So now I will set them up and I'll show you how I do that. And then so I use the bolts and nuts to adjust it in and out, so it is at exactly 42mm all the way round. I checked it with my vernier calipers and just clamped it over. So yeah, when I did that, adjusted them all out to 42mm, so now I can set the other one up the same size and then weld it. Well, I'll tack it all on first, then remove the nuts and bolts, and then weld it properly, and that'll be that. And there they are, all welded together. I've cleaned up to make room for the nuts, filed any slag out of the holes so that I can get the bolts through. So I'll get some rust kill or rust kill them and put a coat of paint on them before they go in. But I've got plenty of other stuff to do first. So I've given them a coat of rust kill and I'll give them a few hours to harden up a bit, and then I'll just aerosol them with a white enamel or something just so that they're protected a bit so they don't turn into a rusty mess again. And they're ready to be fitted as soon as I've done. Now I'll get the struts out and get these bolted on and get the struts bolted back in. So there's the spacer that I made bolted to the top. I put the nuts down so that I've got clearance to put these ones have to come down here through the floor. There's the passenger strut bolted back in with my spacer in it. Looks all good, nice and tight.